me?
I think we're good. All right. Hey, everybody. This is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood, and we're doing How to Run a Hex Crawl adventure. I have with me my guest, Bill Webb. Bill, say hello to everybody.
Hello to everybody.
And so just before we start, I'll remind everybody, please subscribe to the channel. There's the little subscribe button. And also take a look at the Patreon that I have, which is patreon.com/Uncle Matt. If you want to support these interviews and also the games that I run. And I see already that we've got several people watching this one. It's a live broadcast, so anything that we screw up is going to be on screen for you to see. And with that, let's move on to the topic, Bill. And so I guess the first thing there may be, remember the way that YouTube operates is that we may have some people coming in and watching this video who have no idea, who you and I are or anything like that. So, and may not be up with, what a hex crawl is. So the first thing is, a hex crawl is often thought of as being an old school method of play. Which really, I think it's not. It's not linked to a particular edition. It just happened to be a lot more common back in the 80s than it is now. It's a style of adventure that's kind of fallen a little bit out of, not out of favor so much as fewer people do it. So, Bill, my first question to you is a pretty simple one. What is a hex crawl? What distinguishes it from other types of adventures?
Well, at the risk of contradicting you there, I actually believe it was certainly originated in old school D&D. And as a matter of fact, one of the props that I brought to show everybody, which some of you probably seen before, was listed as a required component to play Dungeons and Dragons in the original brown and white box set. And that's this neat little Avalon Hill game called Outdoor Survival. And so it was actually when Gary Gygax wrote the original 3 booklets, he and Dave Arneson wrote those original 3 booklets. They spec'd this out, and the reason they spec'd this out is because the game had its roots in tactical role-playing games, or not role-playing games. That's been a topic lately in some other circles, and tactical board games and tactical war games. And what a hex crawl was originally envisioned as is you would travel around a board with hexagons on it that looks something like this, right? And then it would, depending on...
Hold that up for just a second longer, Bill.
You bet. So what this is, and it's actually a 4-panel board, and it has desert hexes and mountain hexes and river hexes, and I think you can see some little deer on there, and then some little numbered buildings, which were originally in this game were envisioned as ranger cabins and food hexes. And so the idea being you'd move around the board trying to stay alive and not starve to death and not run out of water, and that was the point of that game.
And that's where we sort of turn to the concept of a hex crawl adventure, right, and what makes it different from, for example, me saying, okay, I'm in the city of Greyhawk and I want to go to Divers. I'm just going to count the hexes, figure out how many days that's going to take me, and we're going to roll an encounter once per day, and then I'm going to be there. And
Absolutely.
Hex crawling is very different from that.
It is. And so to kind of continue the history lesson, and this will come around to what you ask in a second, then we got into when the game was new back in the 70s, the world of Greyhawk had hexes on it, but it wasn't really a hex crawl because it didn't have a scale that lent itself to something more than, and you traveled for 22 days and then you reached the Pomarge region instead of the vast swamp or something like that.
Okay, but tell me what a hex crawl is.
Okay, what a hex crawl is it's a D&D game where instead of just saying you traveled 24 days and ended up in point B from point A, the party that you're running the game for actually does travel there. And so what they do is you've got a map with hexagons on it, and another prop would be something like this. And let's see if that can be seen really clearly. What this is a map that, this is where I was going with that history lesson, and I'll continue on that in a minute. This is a map that a guy named Rob Lee drew for me back in 2003 when we were working with Judges Guild to do what's called the Wilderlands of High Fantasy, which is their campaign. It was Bob Bledsaw's and Bill Owen's campaign setting. And what I would contend is that really those two guys took what Gary and Dave had written into the original books and actually created what I would call the first hex crawl campaign. And so what it is instead of traveling from point A to point B in 24 days, you actually move across a map, and there are things on that map. Now, those things might be a forest or a roving band of raccoons, or they might be a castle full of goblins, or they might be an ancient red dragon. And so sort of what a hex crawl really is, instead of making a de minimis level of detail on your wilderness travel and on where you're going from point A to point B, it focuses very much on the journey instead of just the destination. And so when you're actually doing the wilderness travel, you play out the wilderness travel, and that can involve a level of complexity from as light as what I do, which is really I track your travel and your days and that type of thing, and you move a certain speed based on what kind of terrain you're going through. So it's obviously, it takes very slow to move through high mountains. It's very fast to move along a road. And so you have a certain movement that your party has. You move through the areas you go, and that means traveling from, as you would imagine, definitively a hex to a hex, right? And then each of those hexes has a chance, or in some cases, if you've written a giant compendium book like this, like we have, it may have some predefined areas. So another good example of that would be the work that John Stater's done with his work, and you can look him up on lulu.com, Stater. He actually he's written a series of 20 or 25 insert into your campaign. These are hex crawls type books, which are kind of neat. He did a little bit of work for my company as well back 8 years ago.
Okay, so let's.
Or am I missing? I feel like I'm not completely explaining it.
Oh, no, that's fine. I'm gonna wrap in together a few of the things that you said so that we've got kind of a nutshell look at the whole thing. So what it is that as Alex Karashun has said in the chat comments, the journey is the game rather than being the endpoints of the journey. And so the idea is you've got this hex. They're usually very small hexes, somewhere between 5 to 10 miles per hex.
Right.
And the idea is you say, okay, you're in this hex here. It's a forest hex. You don't really know what's around, except maybe you can look ahead and sort of guess what it is that are in the directions. You've got 6 directions you can go. Those are the faces of the hexagon. You've got a movement rate, and you move into the next hex. You find out what's there. Then if you're still going, you move into the next hex that's there, and the DM is either rolling random encounter. It's probably a combination of rolling some random encounters and having some places that are mapped, not mapped, that you've got a key where hex number 00740 has got an angry red dragon in it who will let you go only if you give it rubies. And then what happens is it's a pure sandbox, pretty much, unless the DM fudges it a little with moving the dragon closer or something. But it's a pure sandbox in which you get to determine to decide which path you're taking. A lot of times it's pure exploration, and you don't have a destination. Or you may be looking for the village of Hamlet, and you don't know where it is, but at least maybe the dragon will tell you. Maybe you run into a village where they know where Hamlet is, and they'll tell you it's kind of in the north, in the northeast, and so you keep picking that face of the hexes to go in that direction. So that in a nutshell is what a hex crawl is. Yes. And now we're going to talk, Bill. We're going to talk a little bit about why you would do it. I think you probably see why that would be fun. But mostly we're going to get Bill talking about the technique of doing it, because this is the way that he runs his campaign. So we've got our nutshell. Bill, take it away now in terms of what do you get out of that kind of gaming, and how do you do it?
Well, the best thing for me, and I think that if you spoke with the, 200 players or whatever that played with me on a regular basis, at various points in my life over the last 40 years or so, is that you're not dictating as the game master what your players are going to do. So you can give them, one of the clearest examples I can give of this. A couple of years ago, I was playing with the kids. Matt, the kids. And Jillian, who's my daughter, has a high-level priest, and their mission was they were searching for this ruined temple that was someplace in these mountains in the Elfin lands, in the Wilderlands. And as they moved through, they'd encounter various things. One of the things they'd encounter would be small villages. And so with a combination of random encounter tables plus adventure hooks for stuff that I had in my mind that I wanted them to do, I'd throw rumors or hints about what it was they were going to do, and they could decide which of those to act on. So in this particular example, there was the cattle had been being murdered, and all their blood had been drained. And Jillian immediately goes, "Vampires, the heck with that. We're going a different direction." And another one, they had the princess being stolen by the Goblin tribe, and that was another one where they actually acted on that. And so I had to sort of improv up something that I had thrown at them as a MacGuffin or a hook, but it was based on they had to travel to find it. So in traveling to find it, they might, I believe in that particular instance, they had to find a boat to travel along a river to avoid a big swamp because they didn't want to encounter a bunch of trolls that were in the swamp that they'd also heard rumors of. So it didn't just say you travel to the cave of the Goblin tribe. We spent probably 4 or 5 sessions of them doing the wilderness travel with 40 or 50 other interesting things that happened along the way. Everything from finding, old ruins to fighting some giant spiders to sort of the difference would be The Hobbit is a hex crawl and Lord of the Rings is not, if that makes sense to anyone.
I've heard that analogy done as well. I think that's a pretty accurate analogy in terms of the feel, that you get. And that's one of the things, because, the type of adventure that you run, whether it's a dungeon or a city or whatever, is the lens through which you are seeing the fantasy world. The rules are too, obviously, but in terms of, how you're approaching it, the hex crawl is a different lens into fantasy than the journey that's got 2 known points.
Right. And the best thing about that for me, and the thing that I've gotten a ton of feedback over the years from my players, is that it's not all objective based. Not everything's objective based. So they can go do what the heck they want. They can duck the stuff they don't want to do. And they make conscious decisions on that. Not finding the vampires. Of course, it wasn't actually vampires, but it was not going after a vampire lair or a vampire coven or whatever you would call it, a pack of vampires. I'm not actually sure what a pack of vampires would be. What do they call a bunch of bats? Probably a pack, right? Because they're like rodents. Anyway, a swarm, I guess, might be a swarm or a pack. But rather than going to do that,
someone's going to put that in the comments. By the way, we will have an answer to that fairly shortly.
I'll roll with whatever bats are. But rather than do that, they were able to make a choice and go do something else. And so I wasn't leading them by the nose and telling them what they had to do in the adventure. They got to pick. It was sort of like a pick your own adventure type thing, and it always is in my games. I never tell people, you have to go do this.
Coven.
It's
a coven of vampire and a murder of bats.
A coven of vampires makes sense. And a murder of bats. I like that. So the frogs and the bats are all aligned there, right? Because it's an army of frogs, actually, isn't it? It's a murder of crows.
Murder of crows, also, yeah.
So the fact that they can pick what they want to do and they can go do what they want to do is, for the player, I believe, a really fun and exciting thing. There's a gentleman, Matt, you know him, that I've played with, and I make a point of playing with every year when I go to Dallas, named Jim Johnson, and he actually uses the Outdoor Survival board game as his game. I mean, he uses that. He has a modified one that has like 4 of them glued together, and it's bigger and everything else. But
incidentally, the disagreement has now begun on the chat, because we have a colony, cloud, and flock, colony or camp of bats. No one.
It's a bat colony. It is a bat colony.
Yeah, nobody but our own Zach Glazer is claiming it's actually a murder.
That makes sense. It is a bat colony. I actually, now that you mentioned that, I knew that. Anyway, so the way Jim runs his game is he'll give you at the beginning of the game, okay, well, you've heard about this over here and this over here and this over here. And Matt, I've played with him for probably 8 or 9 long game sessions, 8 hours, till 4 o'clock in the morning type thing. And only once at a convention, of course, did we ever get to one of the objectives. And we were having so much fun traveling around the countryside, fighting gold dragons that attacked us because we had Elric of Melnibone in the party and he was evil. That Jim was able to take that and sort of improv it into sort of wherever it was we felt like going, he took us. And so we as the players steered the adventure with Jim guiding us to the places that were available, really, rather than saying, okay, I want, rather than him as the DM saying, you're going to go to the floating cloud castle that has the 3 giants in it that you're supposed to kill so you can take their treasure. And of course, my guy stole the castle as well because he was a thief. But that was the only time we hit the objective. But rather than just saying you're going to go there and you guys appear and there's a beanstalk going up and there's this floating cloud castle, we had to travel to get there, and we got distracted, as gamers are sometimes known to do.
No,
we ran into a castle and there was an evil wizard that decided he was going to geas us, and so of course we killed him. And then we ran into another 3 or 4 random encounters that led to more stuff. And so rather than a linear adventure, it was sort of dendritic, where we had the one point where we started, and that led to 5 points that we could go, and we picked number 3, and then that led to another 5 that we could go to, and we picked number 2. And sometimes in a longer term campaign that wasn't being run over 12 or 16 hours at a convention, we probably would have eventually ended up at those objectives that we were originally seeking. But the way that we got there was up to us. And so I guess the overall message there is the difference in directing how you get there in the end is far more on the players than it is on the DM saying, you travel here and you go there along this linear path, as opposed to they can get there 10 different ways or hundreds of different ways.
I also think that when we were saying about the the lens through which you see the fantasy, one of the things about a hex crawl is that it makes you feel much more like a person who's being buffeted by the tides of circumstances and whatever there is here, and you have to sort of jury rig a solution to things, and oh god, we're lost. It's a lot more of a sort of a human scale of fantasy, which again is that that's very much Hobbit versus Lord of the Rings. In the Hobbit, some of the issues where you forgot your pocket handkerchief, much
kind of a big deal, right?
Yeah, it's like the kind of stuff that would really piss you off in real life when you
So the other thing that I find is really nice about it, and this is good because who would play a druid in first edition or in Swords and Wizardry, and like from what I understand, and I know I've played 5th edition, but I didn't play a ranger. I played a bard. But who would play? From what I understand, no one wants to play rangers because they're infinitely weaker than paladins and fighters. And I don't know if that's true or not.
Not anymore. They put some stuff in the next book that makes ranger freaking. If you watch my game, there's a running thing with Ala Fedorova about how her ranger is totally broken. Ask about sharpshooting. Anyways, sorry, you touched on one of my pet peeves.
Anyway, I don't know any rules past first edition, but the beauty of it is it gave those classes, it makes predict weather a good spell. Mm-hmm. It makes locate plants and animals a good spell. It makes control temperature 10-foot radius a good spell, other than killing fish with it. There's a lot of applicability to tracking. There's a lot of applicability to using your brain and looking for a pass, or looking, pass through the mountains or a ford through the river. And the idea, like you mentioned a minute ago, about you feel more human, is you're thinking of things and trying to do things that aren't just swinging your sword or shooting a fireball.
It's more variety of action.
More variety. It also, for me, and this is, and anyone who's read anything I've written knows that I incorporate this into even my dungeons. But for me, and I think for my players, it gives them an opportunity to do cool things like, okay, how are we going to get across that gorge, right? And so they figure out they can knock this tree down, and it'll, will it fit or not? And then, okay, so now we have a tree that's stretching across the 60-foot chasm below that falls 100 feet into a raging river,
or a tree that's so far down the chasm that it looks
exactly, that missed by 8. I mean, there's
by that much.
Yeah, exactly. Or when you step on it, it bounces a little bit, but it creates I don't know, sort of an Indiana Jones feel as a player, where you have to do stuff achieve objectives and encounter obstacles and stuff like that, where you normally normally don't even think about stuff like that except in a dungeon setting sometimes. And it has a lot of play. And then what do you do when the goblins with arrows are shooting at you from the other side of the chasm while you're trying to cross the tree, or whatever that is?
All right, let me interrupt again with the chat commentary. I guess Phil Stroud, I would like to applaud. This is kudos to you for starting an edition war, realizing what happened, and pulling back the message. So I bow to you, sir or ma'am, for amazing restraint that one seldom sees on the internet. And then next thing, Brian Davidson has asked, how strict are people being about what is and is not a hex crawl? I have my own style and way of tracking movement across the map. And I think that the answer I would give to that is that a hex crawl can be all kinds of different things. We're just sort of grabbing a word that's common out there. There's absolutely no right way to do or not do a hex crawl, but it sort of encompasses, I think, this the stuff that we've been describing here that's fairly subjective, like it's more like The Hobbit. It's sandboxy, you can make your own way, and then we're just sort of dumping the word hex crawl onto all the different methods that can be used for that. So I think that's what the thing is. It's not something where you're doing it right or wrong.
No, there's no way to do it right or wrong. But I've described as what I do. For that matter, if you wanted to, and I've actually seen this done incredibly effective by a number of folks. Greg Vaughn is probably the most prominent of which, where he knows what's gonna happen to them as they move through the map, but he still travels them through the wilderness, and he places the encounters. So they might travel, as they're appropriate, right? So they might travel 14 days, and he makes them, move through the mountains and all that other stuff. But he knows that sometime in that 14 days, they're going to encounter the hangman tree that has the zombie on it, that has the thing in its pocket that tells them where they need to go.
Let me step back from that in just a second, because I want us to turn to the idea of how it's actually run, and you're describing one of the different ways that they can be run. So before we get to that, let me we've got a really good chat room going here. Robert Moorhead has just pointed out something that we haven't mentioned yet and might get to, but since we're talking about the flavor, maybe now's the time to point it out, which is, he says, what changes hex crawls, I'd say, is how big the hex is. And I absolutely agree with that. I think the larger the hex that you've got, the closer you get to that sort of thing of you're just going from A to B.
Right.
And so the smaller, when you're in the 5 mile hexes, then you've got the thing that's probably, if you're trying to put a name on a hex crawl, I see you're closer to a serious hex crawl at 5 mile hexes than you are when you've got 30 mile.
Right, and what you just said is absolutely what I was just explaining, the difference between like the way Greg runs a game and I run a game. Greg likes, at least in my opinion, the times I've played with him or what I've seen him write, he uses 50 mile hexes. Okay, and so during that 50 miles, maybe one thing will happen. During that next 200 miles, maybe nothing will happen. Maybe, and so he uses it on a grander scale with more set piece mechanics than what I do. I use 5 mile hexes, and so the rolls and the things that can happen during that 5 mile hex are bigger, or there's more of them. Doesn't mean they'll happen as frequently, because I don't use any set piece encounters in that stuff usually, or very few. But you can almost make it work however you want. What I would probably say would not be a good way to do it was use 5 mile hexes with lots of set piece encounters, because then you're going to only be moving 5 miles, getting the heck kicked out of you by a pack of hobgoblins, moving another 5 miles, getting beat up by a bunch of trolls, moving another 5 miles, getting eaten by, I guess we decided it was a coven of vampires. So the encounter frequency, to me, dictates the viability of your hex size. If you're traveling, if you're going to travel through 8 hexes a day because you're on horseback moving 40 miles through the plains or something like that, it's probably a bad idea to have your encounter frequency where you're getting 1 encounter for every hex.
And this too is the perennial argument between you and Greg, which I heard every single convention, about twice a convention, is the joke that you Greg does the encounters, the important things, whereas you will have them encounter squirrels.
Sure.
And that actually it matches with the two different approaches to doing it. Greg's more event-based thing versus your more random multiple encounters. If you're going to have lots of encounters, then it's fine for some of them to be squirrels.
That's the thing. I'm trying to remember what Skeeter called it. He called it, I think in Sortiver, I think he put in it was small furry animals, and then the next encounter was small but vicious furry animals or something like that. And see, I like to use a lot of, I mean, I play a low fantasy game, right? So a lot of my stuff is, you're right. You encounter squirrels that eat your food, or you encounter squirrels and you eat them as food, because a lot of times players are looking for food. Squirrels is probably an exaggeration.
Well, that was the joke. That was the his hyperbolic example.
I actually do have small furry animals that you can encounter, and they get in your stuff, or they're anyway. Yeah, you're right. It's a micro scale versus a macro scale for sure.
Now let's so we've talked about one way of doing it, which is sort of putting words in Greg's mouth. We'll call that the Greg method. Greg Vaughn, by the way, is a former partner of Frog God Games, who did lots of Pathfinder stuff. He was involved in writing the Pathfinder rule book and who did a lot of their monsters and things like that. So he was sort of a Pathfinder rock star, just so that y'all know who he is. So you've got a mix with Greg of pre-planned events, but also other things are going to happen while you're moving through the wilderness, depending on sort of which hex you get to. There's, so Greg would sort of do it that way with a mix of pre-planning plus random. And so that's one method of doing it. And we'll move on to other ones. We do have one question about how transparent are you about the fact that it's hexes? Do you describe things in terms of hexes or in terms of 5 miles?
Yeah, I do. I describe it in terms of hexes, and I guess that it's.
So do I.
You want it? Yeah, I mean, I've seen people use squares. I've seen people use hexes. I'm like, I actually have. I mean, I'm old school war gamer, right? But I actually have one of the players' job is to tell me which hex they move into, and then roll 2d10 every time they move, 2d10 and a d6, and the d6 is to see if they get lost, and the 2d10 are to see if they encounter something, and that something could be a burned up wagon with dead oxen attached to it. I have tables for all this stuff, which is terrifying. But or it could be a ancient red dragon, or it could be a cave that leads to a dungeon. It could be lots of different things. More often than not, it's stuff, and not something super important. But it could be that they go through that entire 5 mile hex and they don't roll any 1s or 2s on the 10-sided dice, and they don't roll any 1s or 2s or sometimes 3s if they lack a druid or a ranger on the d6, and they move right through the forest hex like it wasn't even there, and they just don't find anything of interest.
Right. And now I think what Phil's point is it's one that probably doesn't really apply to hex, doesn't apply specifically to hex crawls. It's got a lot to do with any sort of gaming, which is just how open. Oh, there's Krista. Hang on a second. Let me click on the thing here. Here's Krista, Bill's wife. She's the one that actually runs the company. Her and Zach.
Yeah. Hey, would you ask John to make me a drink? Yeah. Who's going to make me a thing? Okay.
All right. So the question being sort of how careful are you with the curtain in terms of making it fantasy? You see horrible pig-faced things, coming out of the forest, or are you like you've got 6 orcs, roll initiative? And I think lots of people just generally play at different levels of abstraction, and it doesn't really matter. It's just your group.
Yeah, for me, I don't use monsters out of the books in my games, and so that's not completely true. I'd use orcs or trolls or something, but for most of my adversaries, and certainly anything that's very weird, I'll describe it because they don't know what it is. Because I don't use, if it's been published, I typically don't use it in my games. Conventions are different. I use stuff from at conventions that people recognize, so that Ian McGarty's one round plans work on it. So I'm not I'm not transparent. I'm about as opaque as you get. I say you see a large hairy beast with 3 tusks, and and it's 12 feet long, and The best one was actually, this is from a convention, but where I described they saw a gray, hairless giant, looks like a giant with claws on its arms, and it turns around and they notice it's got 4 eyes, and it looks like a 3-ton intellectual property violation. And of course, because it was an Umber Hulk, right? And so it was, but I typically don't. I'm typically not very transparent with that. Other people are.
But on the other hand, you're saying you've gone 3 hexes, so there are areas where.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah,
everybody has their own mix about what is it that gets the players into the fantasy, and what is it that you don't really need to give a damn about. It's a lot quicker to say that it looks like a 67 Chevy.
Completely. And so that's just, if it's an orc or a troll or something like that, I'll typically tell them. The really useful thing for me, and again, running a freeform hex crawl, not a pre-planned hex crawl.
And so let me jump in. Hang on, before you get on that, just to point out to everybody that now Bill's given us a second method for running a hex crawl, which is having lots of tables and truly doing a random determination of what it is that people are going to run into, all the way to something that is not necessarily a monster. It might be a burned out wagon, and then you on the fly you develop that because you got it from a table. But there you've got a true sandbox campaign rather than something that has some pre-planned events the way that Greg does it. Greg designs an adventure thread that's going to be going through it so that there is there's some continuity and you're getting somewhere, as opposed to Bill running a pure sandbox where even Bill doesn't know what's going to happen, and he's going to have a lot of fun finding out.
Yeah, exactly. And that is really fun. It requires some effort on the fly, which is, as some folks know, can be pretty interesting sometimes. What I was going to get to with the tables, like, so let's say, for example, that an encounter is indicated, right? And then you roll a 7, which means there's a wreck. And all these stuff, the tables I use are out of a really old Judges Guild product.
The Ready Reference?
Yeah, Ready Ref sheets. And
those are still worth buying if they're for sale anywhere.
I think they're on drive-through as a PDF, and everybody should own a copy. They're awesome.
Judges Guild Ready Reference sheets. Even though some of the stuff you'll never use, some of it you're like, oh my God, that's the most concise, useful table for doing stuff on the fly that I've ever seen.
The guy that does the D30 stuff,
Richard LeBlanc,
his stuff is really good too, and I've actually used some of that as well. I've got Xerox copies of a number of pages out of that, but I use that. So you roll a 7, that means there's a wreck. You roll another D6, and it means there's a wreck of a tower, and then you roll for its keeper, and you roll a 5, and that means that there's lycanthropes living in that tower.
And let me jump into, we've got a very good chat room here. Follow Me and Die, who incidentally is a big supporter of Uncle Matt's, and so a very good guy, points out that yes, the Ready Reference sheets are on one bookshelf, and by one bookshelf he means RPG Now and Drive Through RPG. So if you do want to see those, and I really depending on the price of them, they're probably pretty cheap because they're like 16 pages. I would really pick those up. Even if you play 5th edition, I take a look at those. There's much less of the whole, oh wow, this is a crappy 1970s project. It'll hit you like that right when you open it up, because it's like in Courier font, and the reason it's in Courier font is that it was typed on a typewriter. But it's look through that for a moment and see the quality of the tables, because they're really good.
The other, so the Richard LeBlanc's books are another one I'd recommend. If you're going to run a hex crawl campaign that's more freeform, I'd recommend his stuff. There's the blue one, and I don't remember what it's called now, but it's the D30 stuff, and it's excellent. $3.99. Yeah, they're cheap. The other one is the other one that was really useful for me was Joe and Susie Browning's, or Susie and Joe Browning. They're a mystical medieval society, or magical mystical medieval society, or whatever it was they put out back in like 2003. And the reason it was cool was it had stuff not related to monsters and relics, but it had stuff related to villages and towns. And I actually used some tables out of that where some folks were adventuring around in my world, and they found a silver mine, and it was occupied by something, and they killed it. Well, now they have this silver mine. They know the location of it. And that had really cool rules for how could they exploit that, being 200 miles from the nearest city. Okay, we have the silver mine. Well, what the heck do we do? And then the whole adventure became, how do they mine silver and safely return it to the city to get their money without getting mugged by the bandits and the dragons and everything else on the way that found out that they found all this silver. So, it was the randomness of some of those tables and some of those things, that the direction the party went and discovered stuff ended up being the basis of 3 or 4 months of a campaign, because that was the direction that those guys went. They found the silver mine. Oh my God. I think Ready Ref Sheets have something about it, but you got to be careful with the quantities on the money.
Oh yeah. No, it's only for those tables. Yeah. Don't follow anything about dollar amount, gold piece amounts or anything like that in the really old school stuff, because the money systems are different.
6 times 100,000 gold pieces of value in the mine, and you're like, whoa, suddenly it's like, yeah, they've got 1.8 million gold pieces or something, and that could be a problem.
Okay, so let's run through a few of the things, because in your method, which is sort of my method too, I do something a little bit like Greg's. I have some set piece encounters that I'll move around when I run out of stuff, but mine's mostly a sandbox too. So if you are doing it Bill's style, which is the true sort of sandbox wandering through, you can either make your own tables, which you probably will take you about 10 years of doing it, bit by bit, or you can get a hold of some tables, which also can be more fun. And so the stuff we talked about for getting hold of tables, I think everybody's in favor of the Ready Ref Sheets that are in there. Those are not super specific. They will give you types of things, like it will say, you get there's a medium-sized castle, something like that. So they're really good for top level, vague, on the fly stuff. And then some of the other things that have been mentioned, we got Follow Me and Die once again, has got the title of the Richard LeBlanc product. First of all, it's New Big Dragon Games is the name of the publisher. And the name of the product that we're talking about is the D30 Sandbox Companion.
Yeah, that's a great product. It's just
also the expedition. When we talked about Joe Browning and Susie Yee, okay, that is Expeditious Retreat Press, and the product that we're talking about, and this is not one that I've read. I read their Magical Medieval City, but not Magical Medieval Society. Magical Medieval Society is the other thing that we've talked about, and that's where Bill's people found the silver mine. So those are. Somebody has also mentioned the book that I wrote, which is Tome of Adventure Design, which I think it's a great book, but I actually wouldn't use that for at the table. And I say that in the intro to the book. It's not really an at the table resource. It's more for when you're planning things ahead of time. So that I would say that
I use it all the time. So does my son. We use it for, you hit the village. And so there's a village there. What the hell am I going to do with this village? Well, you can very readily, in about 5 minutes, determine that the village is at war with the village over there, and it's because they stole their sheep, and they're mad at them because the Toad is pretty useful for this too. It's useful it's not useful like Ready Rep is, and not useful like the D30 companion book is useful, but in a what the heck, what are you going to do with this village? How are you going to create an adventure out of them going into this village, other than them going and talking to the Weird Bear bartender that we always put in? What are they going to do? And you can get some pretty good ideas pretty rapidly in the matter of a few minutes. It's not on the fly, but it's in a matter of a few minutes.
Yeah, it's a longer book. I mean, it's a book of seriously in-depth tables, which makes it more useful when you've got time ahead of time, and way less useful if you've got no time. So, so Tome of Adventure Design, I just had a phenomenal review on Questing Beast, but I wouldn't use it for the particular topic that we're doing, which is hex crawls. Now, I've got a couple other comments once again, and this is Arthur Hoffert, who has points out another methodology thing. Again, it would be something that would be used with the tables. And his idea, which I like a lot and have never thought of before, is that he's made a couple of subtables in which there are listed additional complications, impulses, and actions for random encounters, and then you extrapolate it. So if you roll something on a simple table like trolls, you would have something like, lost and looking for friends, I guess, would be one thing. And so then you've got an entirely different troll encounter than you might think up on the fly when you are just looking at an entry that says trolls. And so that's a really good way of,
That's actually kind of awesome.
yeah, it is. And that's a way of branching.
Good
It
work on
branches out your decision tree.
Yeah.
Sorry, go back, Bill. I was talking over the top of you.
Oh no, I was just saying good work on the extrapolate, because I always have to extrapolate that stuff. Who was the gentleman who'd done that? That's pretty cool.
His name is Arthur Hoffert.
Arthur, man, send me a copy of those tables. I want to see them.
So we've got that, and so and Zach Glazer has asked whether the Borderlands Journey Generator is good for this stuff, and the answer is no, Zach, it's not. I have not written anything that's particularly useful for hex crawls. I haven't. I would love to advertise something, but it's not something that I've focused on.
Journey Generator is more of a planning tool for what are you going to have the next adventure be, rather than on the fly deal.
Yeah. So so we've got several. I go back. Arthur Hoffert. That's a brilliant idea. That really, what you look for with tables. Let me jump into another topic of tables real quick. Tables, you can have one big table, but if you want to get multiple entries for that, use a subtable, so that whatever thing it is that you roll on the one table, your subtable will spin that in several different ways. So subtables are really, really good as long as you don't have too many of them. But that's really, really a good idea. Robert Moorhead has asked the question of how much map seeding do you do ahead of time in terms of major dungeons and towns, rivers? What do you do with that, Bill?
That's actually really easy for me to answer. There's in my game world, there's two continents. One of them is the Lost Lands one that we have from that we do for Necromancer games. The other one, of course, is Wilderlands of High Fantasy, right, from the Judges Guild. And those two continents have been around in my game now for, I don't know, since 1977 or something, right? The level of detail that I have is, it's got the stuff I want them to go do that I wrote, like the big mega dungeon, anywhere within 150 hexes of the thing. I'll probably have people telling them about it, because I want them to go play there, because I spent hours and hours writing the thing. Whether or not they ever end up there or not is up to them. But what I typically will do is I'll seed, maybe, was it Arthur who asked that?
No, that was Robert Moorhead, and really he's talking about terrain features, major dungeons and towns and river locations are the things that he asked about.
Most of that I draw. I draw a lot of that stuff on the map, and then I sort of play it by ear. Now, in terms of where the dungeons are, where the villages are, I'll typically place those. Particularly towns, anything bigger than 50 people that's going to be able to sell you a suit of leather armor, are usually a dot on the map. Monster lairs, I only put the big ones on. And so if there's a red dragon or a black dragon in the swamp, or a castle full of giants, I'll typically put those on the map. That way I know that they're there as a set piece encounter, and if you go there, then you may encounter them. With the little stuff, I don't put badgers on the map. I also don't put things like river fords typically on the map, unless there's a really good reason to, like it's a very deep, swift river and you have to travel to a certain area to find the ford. The nice thing about those old Judges Guild tables is they sort of give you the ability to randomly generate a lot of that stuff. So I don't typically go to that level of detail. If anyone's seen Wilderlands of High Fantasy that we published back as Necromancer games with Judges Guild back in the dawn of time of 3.0, that level of detail is what I use for the Wilderlands portion of my game, because I've got it and we wrote it, and it was so it's I know that in Hex 0221 is the Isle of the Blue Tower, which is a single mountain to the southwest corner of the island. Due to its vantage point, the tower can be seen from any location of the island. And Nysol, a level 16 male human wizard with some magic items.
Nicely done, wizard that climbs the library. Yeah. That was an actual laugh out loud that people got to see on the screen. Bill, his comment is, I put badgers on my map.
Well,
But
there
no,
you go.
but no, he says I put badgers on my map, but no cities. It's all badgers.
There you go. Honey badger don't care.
It's all badgers.
uh, um, yeah, that Skeeter would claim I put a lot of badgers on my map too.
Is that
but,
Jason McCartan, by the way? If not, Jason McCartan will back you up.
Yeah. And anybody who's seen Sword of Air would kind of get a good idea of the level of detail I put in there too. The big stuff's there. You know, the anti-paladin's castle in the valley is there. The major villages are there. And the rest of the stuff is, you know, you're traveling through hundreds of miles of area, and it's whatever you find.
All right, so we're still basically, once again, to recap for anybody that's come in terms of the specific advice for running a hex crawl. We've got two models, one of which is that you map some events out ahead of time, and the other one is that you have actually there's three. Then one that you've got is one where you've done your own tables for something and you're mixing and matching that with your pre-preparation, and then the third one is using commercial tables like the Ready Reference Guide. And so we've talked about a couple of products that really can I think, taken all told, those three products, the Medieval Society, the Ready Ref Sheets, and then the D30 Companion, you could probably run a full-scale hex crawl using the tables in those books without needing to bother with much else.
Yeah, the only other piece I'd add to that would be there's a really useful set of tables in the first edition DM guide for encounter tables. The encounter tables in the back, you know what I'm talking about, Matt? The ones that have different terrain types, because that was really based on hex crawl encounter tables.
Oh yeah, and like the first edition D&D.
Those tables are, to this day, I think, unsurpassed in utility. They're excellent. And because they incorporate the rarity of the monster and everything else into the encounters. So
and that actually dovetails precisely with something that Zach just asked, which was, how about balanced combat encounters when using tables? And I have an answer to that, and that is
balanced combat encounters in my game.
Well, this is my thing. I think it's very important in a D&D game, and this is one of the things I talk about with Mega Dungeons too, is to let the players decide what risk level they are going to undertake.
Yes.
And so in a wilderness, and that's clear in a dungeon encounter, because it's just the level, how deep are we going to go? Whereas in a wilderness area, you've got to have some demarcation that tells the players you are about to step up on the difficulty level of your encounters. And so that can be rumor, it can be borders, but I always try and put something in there for that signal. Now, that's not traditional. The way that people used to do this in the real old school thing was, you're going to roll those dice, and if a horde of dragons comes up and your first level, you just shouldn't have been outside the city walls in the first place. So what I'm describing, don't take it as being an indication of this is the way people used to do it and it's old school. I switched that, but it's because of a particular game theory that I like to have the players making those decisions. I mean, my thing is always allow the players to get as many meaningful decisions as possible.
Well, and I apply a level of I mean, you can certainly encounter a horde of ancient red dragons right outside the village if you do, but the probability is that if that were the case, humans would be extinct. So I do apply kind of a rarity factor to my critters. So something like goblins, of course, would be very common. Bandits would be very common. An ancient red dragon, there's probably one on the map, right? Just because, or it might be a family of them on the map. Just because if there were more than that, there wouldn't be anything else. And so, it's unless they were like, I don't know, asleep or something for 500 years, all of the Hobbit, right? But you do have to apply a little bit of fairness. That being said, like Jim Ward always says, he doesn't kill player characters. He allows them to commit suicide in his games. If there's an ancient red dragon lair, probabilistic is that you as a DM need to be able to explain to them, or at least I think you do, that, as you see the scorched area around the cave complex with, the melted piles of bones, like the dragon's lair in Game of Thrones, where they picked up Daenerys at the end of the last season or whatever. The thing's got a pile of bones like 100 yards in diameter with this dragon sleeping in it, right? It's all the stuff it ate. I mean, you should have some indicators. Something more insidious than a dragon, I don't know, a demi-lich or some nonsense like that, something really dangerous like that. You might not have as much warning. But then again, you might have, the fact that there's a magically trapped, rune-encrusted, alabaster with, adamantine etched stuff in it, door on the first level of the dungeon or whatever. And do you open it? Okay, then, if you giving them some warning is a little bit smart, and applying a little bit of judgment about what they encounter is a little bit smart too.
Yeah, well, you and I do that differently, and so I think it's usually interesting for people when they hear about where authors disagree. You definitely are somebody who writes a mega dungeon with highly varying levels of difficulty, and you put in the warnings like it's the adamantine door. In my case, I really do tend to stick fairly closely to the rule of stuff on the first level is easier, stuff on the second level is a little harder, stuff on the third, and that's simply because I feel like the baseline game play is to let them choose the level of difficulty, not to make them figure out the level of difficulty. And it's completely legitimate to make them figure out the level of difficulty as a level of skill of play. I just do it a different way than you do. So
now the one modification of that with the hex crawl, and this is a really key point, because I think somebody had asked a little bit about this, but it's a really key point, is when you're in the wilderness, you can run like hell. You can run. Your horses might get eaten, or one of your players might get eaten or something, but you're not constrained by walls and typically or ways that you can't get away. I mean, you can run and hide, go hide in the woods. So if you encounter something really, something wicked this way hops, the probability is you can get away from it, or at least try to, if you just scatter. Of course, if you encounter a tribe of ogres, there could be a problem, but you can still try and run. And if you're in the woods, you might get away. So knowing when to run away and knowing when to avoid encounters is something that comes into play in a very extreme sense in the wilderness. It always has. If you look at the original AD or OD&D books, wilderness travel was about 500 times more dangerous than dungeon travel. Because when you encountered goblins, it was like 3D100 of them, right? When you encountered ogres, it was 4D10 of them. And so you could get some pretty gnarly encounters in the wilderness, stuff that you just hoped you made it to the dungeon, because then it was safe on the first, second, and third levels, right?
I remember talking to Janelle Jaquays at one of the conventions. It's probably North Texas. And somebody else in the conversation asked her, so how did you guys do wilderness adventuring? And she was like, oh, fuck no. If you went out in the wilderness, you were going to die.
Yeah. Well, bearing in mind that Gary built all that stuff around a tactical war game where you were traveling around with an army. So, you had your army of guys. If you didn't leave town without 30 archers and 25 spearmen and a dozen, guys on horses with lances and bows. And so encountering a couple hundred goblins was not as big a deal. You were the lords and ladies of the manor going on an adventure, and you took torchbearers and lots of hirelings with you. So
you had people to carry your pocket handkerchief for you.
You did, and you had the guys carrying the holy hand grenade, and you had you had all the stuff. They just didn't typically go into the dungeon. They'd stay outside and guard your horses and make your camp while you went into the dungeon. So the paradigm was a little different with the party being a much larger group of people than it has been for many years.
So we've let's talk a little bit more about the about little tricks, with the understanding that some of these little tricks may match with Bill's method. Some of the little tricks might match better with my method. Some of them might match better with what we've identified as the Greg method, possibly incorrectly, but the idea of the planned encounters. One of the things that I do now, and Bill has talked about the fact that the significant encounters like the Ancient Red Dragon would be the things that he's already put on the map, and then presumably that also means that you would re-roll a result of Ancient Red Dragon unless it happened to be nearby.
Or I'd have it flying overhead and they saw it in the distance or something like that, and maybe they could track it to its lair that way or something like that. But I wouldn't necessarily have it just attack them.
So let me say that the way that I do that, and it cuts corners, is that a lot of the time I will go through and write without even rolling it. I just sort of draw them on the place, a little white triangle, and that white triangle indicates there is something very dangerous and very rewarding here. But I haven't figured out what it is yet, and I might end up doing it by a table, or I might think it up while I'm going along. I mean, I do think up a lot of stuff on the fly, and then a lot of times on the map I'll draw an arrow to it and write what it is when that comes to me. If they're starting to get closer, I'll start focusing on. We've got the question from Alex Countertune of, do you think that the waning of emphasis on henchmen and hirelings is responsible somewhat for the decline of hex crawling? I'm going to say no on that one. What do you think, Bill?
Not really. I think in an OD&D standpoint, it might be, but I think in 5th edition or in Pathfinder or in even 3.5 and up, I don't think so at all. I think the encounter tables and the number, if you look at the newer monster manuals, I don't even know if they have a number encountered after 1st edition. Somebody let me know if they do, but I think they don't. I think it's more up to the DM to use his judgment about how big the encounter is to keep it balanced.
I think that if I were to say why it is that hex crawl adventuring declined, I think it's a couple of things. I think it probably starts in 2nd edition, not an insult to 2nd edition. This is just a time frame that a lot of people began thinking about D&D as being more heroic, more Tolkien-esque, more high fantasy than the sort of Conan model of it, in which you might be forced to eat rats to survive.
Right.
And so that's number one. And then number two, I would say, is that 3rd edition was where I think that the nail in the coffin got put in for hex crawling for a while. And the reason there was that because you needed to have stats for your monsters, several things happened. People stopped mixing types of monsters. You wouldn't see the troll, the ghouls, and the something or other, because that would mean the DM would have to keep track of 3 sets of stats. So that was one of the things. And so truly random encounter generation tended to drop off and become a lot less attractive to the DM, because it meant much more concentrated, fast-paced, oh my God, got to get this done, work on the fly with players, looking at you, than you could really handle. And I think that we may see more hex crawling now that we're in 5th edition, because 5th edition reduces a great deal that aspect of the game. Now that we've gone through the sort of 3rd edition, 4th edition Pathfinder block, where there was a lot of granularity and a lot of stuff to follow in monsters, and having the stats in front of you was very important. I think we could see a resurgence in the hex crawl type of thing. Probably still not quite as free form as the older rules, but that's just a matter of truly of really, really simple rules versus rules that have a little bit more complexity added to them.
Right. If someone wants to try a hex crawl game and they haven't done one before, let me throw out a real radical idea for you. I don't give experience points for killing monsters at all in my games, right? And so how do you get experience points? Well, you might get experience points from, doing this, right, which is negotiating with the elves in the forest. You might get experience points from bringing daddy some yummy-looking prosciutto. That usually works. You might get experience points for stealing the dragon's treasure and not having to even fight the dragon, which would probably get more experience points than if you killed the dragon. You might get experience points for exploring. You might get experience points for, winning friends and influence people and making an alliance with tribe A and tribe B of the goblins that used to be fighting with each other. But now you got to make friends with them, and you've got them brought together to fight the gnolls, who are the true threat to everybody. That type of thing puts more emphasis on exploration, and I guess going back to what Matt said earlier about sort of being human, right? Than it did on beating the crap out of the monster. And so it's a way to think about it. It doesn't necessarily work for everybody. I think everybody likes getting experience points for fighting monsters, but my players never do.
That's just mean. I totally give experience for monsters.
I think everyone but me does, Matt. So it's not just you.
Well, you invented cards to give out to them that totally make D&D into a totally new school card game. It's a parlor game. So
I know, right? Totally. Well, that's only
Jim Wampler tried to use one of those in my game, just because Jim is the sort of person who will just try something out. So he held up the card and he said, here's the Bill Webb card. And I think I just sort of looked at him until he was like, doesn't work, does it? Oh, no.
That would be a piece of paper in my game. Well, that was only after we killed 52 players at one convention or something. I decided they needed a boost.
All told, yeah. Now Alex Caterchin also has mentioned there's not much XP in monsters in first edition, and that's true. You always back in the early editions, the bulk of your experience came from the gold, and I think just to make that work, most people did what I did, which was give. If there wasn't gold available, like you're helping out, some peasants who don't have the money to pay you, and what you're killing is a huge number of wolves, but the wolves don't have any treasure, then I would give mission bonuses to fill in for the XP that wasn't available. But yeah, I mean, that is a point well taken. Killing monsters in the earlier editions was not the big source of your experience, and whether it was thought out or not, and I don't know, that did have the effect of the game being treated sort of like a puzzle of, I've got two alternatives. One of them is I could go straight forward and just kill it and get his stuff, but do I have a way where I don't even have to take that right. risk and go all Fafford and Grey Mouser on it and outthink it?
Well, who wants to fight a monster? You can get killed fighting monsters. The other thing that's an interesting topic, and this is particularly in relation to the gentleman who just had the $1.5 million Kickstarter or whatever for Castle Building.
Matt Colville.
Wow, man. Is another thing about Hex Crawls is it lets you go look for where you want to build your castle.
Yes, that was a big thing, actually. I remember that, and it was never really clear, because the TSR stuff talked about the stronghold, and Judges Guild stuff talked about where you put it. But when you put those two things together, the Judges Guild maps were a great way of saying, "Oh, this place, it's perfect," and it was like outside. It wasn't like you. Yeah, you wouldn't say you find the perfect hill. It has forest nearby, and let's see, and there's a mountain. You'd find that sucker out there, and that was really cool.
And this is where you want Joe and Susie's book, because that had the most definitive and most well done. Why you want to build your castle here stuff I've ever seen.
Well, maps. I mean, that comes from the map, though. That when you've got a real small scale map, and your freehold's going to be a 5-mile hex, you can go and find the place that you want.
Has it got water? Has it got forests? Has it got rocks?
Yeah.
Has it got game nearby? And are you accidentally squatting next to the black dragon in the swamp?
Yeah, or my little not filled in white triangle, which would be bad.
Mm-hmm.
We've got 33 people watching, by the way, Bill. So just so you know how it works. So hello to the 30.
My son just brought me $40 a pound meat, so I'm nibbling on a little bit of it.
Yeah, I would do that. So yeah,
he's making us big special dinner because it's our anniversary.
Yeah, so when he says it's ready, we'll go ahead and let you cut out.
It's not gonna be ready for a couple hours. He just brought me a snack.
Yeah,
he's making tenderloin. He's making beef Wellington,
which is one of my favorites, and that's a huge amount of effort to cook beef Wellington.
He's in there doing pastry right now. So yeah.
So anyway, hi 30 odd people. Please come. Hit the chat room. We've got a really, really good chat room going, by the way. So if you aren't set up to where you can see the chat room, I recommend taking a look at it. We are answering questions from the chat room. We've actually gotten some. We got one concept that hit both me and Bill, which was the idea of a subtable that would spin an encounter. So we've got walking the path. Hello, walking the path.
We got like to see that. I'd actually like to see that table.
We got VA welcome, and Wizard that climbs the library says greetings programs. I don't know. Do you think some of them are bots? Some of our bots have had really, really good comments, like, not much XP and monsters in 1E. So, but as soon as somebody tries to sell Chinese-made sunglasses, I do have the ability to block that person from being seen.
How do you know those sunglasses aren't good sunglasses?
They might be, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, can we do like a 2-3 minute break, and I gotta take a leak.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna take a bathroom break, everybody. We will be back. We will call it 7:10 Central Time. That gives us a 5-minute break, and we will see you guys then.
In 5 minutes. I'm on a video. Well, I'm back. No Matt yet, though. All right, we're all back.
I'm a minute late.
You know.
All right, so here we go. What I want to do now is move to a slightly different phase here. Comic Book Jedi is asking, by the way, can you tell us about what we're working on that's new? Comic Book Jedi, we may actually put that off for another video or do it toward the end, but I don't want to derail the specific topic of how to do a hex crawl. So that's a later one, or you can private message either me or Bill, or post, on Facebook and hit that, or you can put that question in the comments and we'll try and answer that, or I'll get Bill on here again for something that's more of a Frog God infomercial. What I want to do is I want to talk about, I want to actually sort of do this and walk through the process visually. So here's a blank sheet of paper. We're going to have to imagine that it's got hexes on it. Now, here's what you do to get your hex paper. There's a place called Incompetech, or if you put in free graph paper in a search on the internet, you will get several places that will, all you need to do is click a button, basically tell it how big the hexes are that you want. Click a button, it'll create a PDF for you, print the PDF. So let's pretend that I just did that and I've got a sheet of hex paper here. You want relatively large hexes if you're doing this on 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, because of the way that the mapping works. You want to be able to have some of your terrain cross over so that you've got both in a hex. And in order to do that, you're going to need relatively large hexes, hexes that are, I don't know, about yay big or bigger.
Yeah, I've got an example I can show here.
Okay, good.
That shows up well at all. But that's an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper. Does it show?
Unfortunately, you can't see the hex lines on that when you put it up against the camera.
I'd say they're...
No, use your fingers. Use your fingers on the map to show where a hex is.
Oh my God. They're about the size of, they're about the one end of it is about the size of my index finger.
Okay. All right. So there's quite a few on there.
That's probably, I'd say it's about a half an inch.
So, and the one that I've got up on mine is about an inch. So, but again, this is the difference between using something that somebody else has done as opposed to DIY. And when you do DIY, as we all know, you need a little bit more latitude for error. So I would take a sheet of paper like this, and usually you're going to know where they start. And so you usually want to put where they're going to start in the middle of the map because you don't know what direction they're going to go. And then you're going to just draw in on here a few different terrain types. And the way I do it is that you have some hills over here, make a range of hills. Maybe there's forest over here. Maybe I'll put a little bit of forest next to my hills. I'm going to have a river, especially if I know that a river goes past my starting point. I'm going to do a river. I am making the error that I always do, which is forgetting the stuff on the what for me is the right hand side of this sheet of paper. So there's some hills, and we're going to say there's a big mountain range over here, and here's a lake over here. So stuff like this, you just throw things on there. And then, like I said, a lot of times I will draw these little triangles here, which are going to signify where my important monsters are, and I won't know necessarily in advance what they are. So I'm going to end up with something like this, which will show the hexes. And then, from their starting point, I'm going to be like, north, south, east, west, northeast, northwest, which direction are you going out of those 6 possibilities? And so that's where I start out with the hex map. And you can see this is the very fast procedure for most people is generating the map, unless you're super artistic and you like to draw extra lines on your map. Then the next thing that I do, and this sounds like this is not something that Bill would do, but what I do is I'm gonna draw certain borders on here, and sometimes they're going to be concentric, and those borders represent the higher danger areas. And if the characters start getting close to one of these, they're going to run into a shepherd or something like that who's going to tell them, well, if you go that way, it's really dangerous, but it's a little safer to go this way. So that is the way that I establish the player choice as to, do we want to go into a more dangerous area? And they just sort of know, as a matter of I'm the DM and they're the players and we've been gaming together for a while, that the rewards are going to be higher in the high risk areas. If they get close to one of my triangles, I'm going to try and think of what's in there so that I can give them a rumor about what's there. I allow them to see some things from their hex. You can't see forests. Anybody who's done any hiking or anything like this, you generally can't see forests at a distance, but you can see mountains. And you can guess at hills at a sort of 5 mile distance. So that's kind of the way that I do that. There's no way of seeing water ahead of time. You're just hoping for water if you need that. And so I end up with, this sort of map, and so the important thing about what's on the map is that it's got my risk levels, which are important for player decisions. It's got 1 or 2 possible pathways people could take. I mean, this river would be a way that was getting easier, and maybe I have a road or something like that. Actually, roads, that really depends on what kind of hex crawl you're doing. If it's a more civilized area or they're trying to get somewhere, a road is good. Otherwise, generally the less interesting stuff is going to happen on the road. That will really affect your hex crawl sort of thing if there's a road, if one of their choices is a road. So that's how I do the basic map, and then it runs to the question of you might, if you were using the Greg method, write down some encounters that they're going to hit almost no matter what they do. If you're doing it my way, it's a matter of writing a couple things down that are ideas for what might be in maybe that area or that area. And if they hit either one of those areas, it's going to turn out to be, okay, that's where the lich is, because that they're in this sort of area where I did think of a lich, and the other one is still empty because I didn't think of, because I only thought of one thing that would be in the areas, which is often called the quantum ogre, as a result of a very insightful blog post that was made, that the ogre can be in one location or the other. And that's basically where I would start from. And then I'm going to want to have tables for my sandbox thing. And again, those tables, I find it easier to use commercial ones because they're very inexpensive, and there are some really good ones out there. I do something often that I call Jordabizing, something which is most of the tables that you're going to get are sort of focused on Western Europe, and I don't run a Western European campaign, and I run a weirder one. So sometimes, goblins I might change into, mole people or something like that.
And the mole men.
the cannibal mole men. So anyway, that's the way that I would do it. Bill, what did you see any big differences?
There's a little bit of difference. It's not that much. I mean, one of the things I'll do typically, and you guys have seen this in stuff I've written before, I think, but I'll create rumor tables that'll be associated with certain friendly centers around the area. This is another thing I think actually John Stater does better than me, and so I remind people, so go take a look at what he does. But he'll typically, I'll typically create rumors associated with a certain finite area, and so it'll give you some ideas of stuff that might be there. For example, I mean, here I'm looking at one of John's books right now, and it has, the rumor is, the dragon in the woods is more friendlier than other red dragons. Right, in Hex 0701, or there are purple dwarves living in the moors and they're wicked, stuff like that. Little weird rumor tables that people could find out from talking to people. Similar to what I think you're saying with your shepherd saying, don't go north, there's a lich there. So that would be how I would dispense that information. It'd be a little differently, but similar, I think. One of the things we haven't really talked about, Matt, that we should probably mention is why the heck would you want to do this?
Yes.
We should talk about that before we stop. So, but what you're talking about is almost the same thing as what I do. It's just I've got my
it's close. People have variations in there, but
I've got my hex maps that have been written and defined for many, many years. You know, so I've got my maps. I haven't drawn any new hexes in a long, long time. Would be the only difference. So I'm not sure there's what you're talking about is really exactly what I do.
Mm-hmm. You were going to talk, but you were going to talk about why.
Well, I was waiting until we finished that first topic. But yes. So why the hell would you want to do this? Okay, probably the thing, and I thought about this when I was gone. Probably the coolest thing about running a campaign this way. As you know, a few years ago, we produced those books that were like the blank journals that have the Orcus in the front and stuff. And some people got those. Well, I ended up playing with one of the guys who got those in Seattle for about 3 years with a group over there before I quit working over there and came back over to the peninsula. And one of the neat things about running the game in a really free-form thing, this dude wrote down everything. He wrote everything down. And so the players were so vested in the creation of the world and the things that were happening, even though much of it was random, that I could go back to Andrew and he would tell me, we're going to go back and explore that underwater pyramid in the Sea of Five Winds in Hex 0518 or whatever it would be.
And that is a good reason for using hexes with the players, by the way, it's so that they can talk about where they want to go to. So, and we've had a couple questions on that. So
countered it. It was really scary, and they couldn't breathe water because they didn't have water breathing spells, and it was 50 feet underwater or whatever. And so he's like, "All right, the druid has water breathing, the wizard has water breathing. Now we're going back there. We're going to check that thing out. That seemed really interesting." And so it created a situation where I was able to, they wanted to go do a undersea adventure, and that was kind of neat. And so one of the things I would encourage with Hex Crawls is if you're not taking copious notes, make sure you've got a chronicler player. And several of the players, there's going to be several people watching this video. I don't know if any of them are on right now watching, but we're going to start a new game with me next week. They've already been Facebooked and told to watch this. But somebody needs to keep really good notes because, Matt will tell you I ain't the guy, but somebody needs to keep really good notes so that, you actually become part of the creation of that game world and that adventure series and sequence. And it's kind of neat. I think it gives the players a real high level of interest where they're participating and they're kind of, I think they get more out of it than they do in any other way you play.
And the reason for that would be that when you are playing on that smaller scale, you don't have to be Gandalf before you can begin changing the map and changing the way things work. If you're talking about, an area that's, 100 miles in every direction from a village or something like that, you're going to be actually able to change things in the world. And changing things in the world is one of the big rewards for players. They feel like they've really, that is a big reward for playing D&D, is changing the map. And so it puts them
village and the bard's singing a song about them. That's pretty cool,
Yeah. And so that, I think that's one of the big benefits of the Hex Crawl scope of things is that it does boost you up to some of the rewards that you get from high level play much earlier in the game. And so.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's why the hell you'd want to do this stuff.
Okay, now we've gone sort of in reverse order. The second to last thing was actually showing the creation of one, and the very last thing was my first question in the entire interview, which was why would you do this? So let's and that for anyone who doesn't know, that's pretty typical of Bill. The things will happen there. He will get around to the answer. It will not be when you expect it to happen, but
sometimes I have to think about it.
Yeah.
What other questions have we got from folks?
Let's see. I think we've pretty much answered the questions as they went along. We still owe In the near future, we owe Comic Book Jedi a Frog God infomercial just to talk about the stuff that we're working on. So we will actually do. I've tried to stay away from backing any particular company a whole bunch, but we do have a lot of inside information on Frog God, so we'll go ahead and do that soon. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. So Bill, when you finish that sesame seed, go ahead and say goodbye to all of your fans that are watching.
Goodbye, everybody, and have fun hex crawling. If anybody has experience or questions or whatever, I'm not that hard to find. Feel free to ping me on Facebook or whatever. I'm a game master and a player first and a publisher second. So I'm always open to discussion on this stuff. And, I'm, like I said, I'm not hard to find.
And so I will say, as we wrap up the video, no matter what kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.
Mm-hmm.